Hello everyone, in this video, let's talk about an interesting topic, the alien. There have been discussions of aliens for quite a few years, and the internet is full of true or fake pictures. For various reasons, the concept of aliens has not become clear. Instead, it has caused various speculations, making it more obscure. In today's video, I'll show you some overlooked information, some scientific findings and historical documents that may not appear to be relevant but indeed have deep connections to aliens, so we can infer a complete story or hypothesis about aliens. When talking about aliens, many people may first think of UFO. Then let's start with one of the largest UFO visible to the naked eyes, the Moon. We are all familiar with the Moon. Humans have been observing the Moon since ancient times. There are calendars relating to the Moon. The reason we say the Moon is a UFO is that we don't know its origin, over which there are different opinions. The ancients asked when the Moon started to appear. The scientific community has several hypotheses about the origin of the Moon, which can explain many phenomena, but also have things they can't explain. For example, the co-formation hypothesis believes that when the Earth was formed, a part of the material formed the Moon at the same time. But the rocky soil that Apollo brought back from the Moon contained some elements that were very different from the Earth, which made the hypothesis unreliable. The capture hypothesis believes that the Moon was caught by the gravity of the Earth, which can explain their different elemental composition, but it can't explain that they have basically the same oxygen isotope ratio. I'm not going to talk about oxygen isotope in depth. If you're interested, you can search for specific information. To put it simple, scientists can estimate the temperature at the time of formation by measuring the ratio of oxygen isotope in the rock. The oxygen isotope ratios of the rocks on the Earth and the Moon are similar. It is generally believed that the Earth and the Moon were formed at the same distance from the Sun, so there are flaws in the capture hypothesis. Not to mention that to capture a star as a satellite, the angle and velocity must be very accurate. Otherwise, it will either pass by or be attracted by gravity. Even artificial satellites need accurate calculations. It's very difficult to capture such a big star as the Moon, unless something called air braking effect was achieved. If it was achieved naturally, then there might be a thick layer of atmosphere on the Earth at that time, changing the speed when the Moon passes and accurately grasping it, then gradually making it a satellite. Currently, scientists are most optimistic about the giant impact hypothesis. A star hits the Earth, smashed out part of the material that created the Moon. This explains the difference as well as the commonality between the two. The difference comes from the star that hit the Earth. The common part comes from the Earth itself. But the impact theory is not infallible. There are still some flaws. For example, impact mechanics suggests that the Moon's material should come mainly from the mantle of the impactor. However, the evidence found so far is the lunar surface material comes mainly from the Earth's mantle. Another example is that impacts can cause partial melting of the Earth, producing a landform similar to the lava sea, but it cannot be found. Then it is proposed that it wasn't a large star that hit the Earth. Instead, many small stars impacted, in order to fix the flaws in the giant impact hypothesis. Because these claims are only hypotheses and cannot be proven, finally the scientists have to agree the origin of the Moon must be more confusing and complex than anyone could have imagined. In other words, the only thing we can be sure of is that we can't be sure. In this regard, the Moon is a total UFO. Not only that, some phenomenon observed by scientists further complicates the origin of the Moon. Let's have a look. The diameter of the Sun is almost 400 times that of the Moon, but looking at it from the Earth, it would feel like the Sun and the Moon are about the same size. This is because the distance from the Earth to the Sun happens to be also 400 times the distance from the Earth to the Moon. Also, the Moon we see is always fixed on one side, because its rotation and revolution periods happen to coincide. This orbital pattern has been going on for a long time. Furthermore, the natural satellites found so far, their orbits are all close to elliptical. Even the artificial satellites' orbits are not perfect circle, but the Moon's orbit happens to be closer to a perfect circle. In addition, The natural satellites discovered so far are no more than 5% of the diameter of their parent star. The Moon, on the other hand, happens to be 27% of the diameter of the Earth. There are other coincidences we won't list here. These alone let's highlight. We see too many coincidences. Writer Asimov, after studying these coincidences, said that, measured from various sources and laws, the Moon should not be there. It is just big enough to cause an eclipse, small enough to still allow the solar corona to be seen. No astronomical reason can be found to explain this phenomenon. This is the coincidence of coincidences. It leads us to the question, so many coincidences, and the probability of each coincidence occurring naturally is extremely low. Is this all just a coincidence? Let's look again at the mainstream hypothesis. The most promising explanation is also flawed. Additional conditions are added, but again with flaws. They just have to keep patching. Because it's a hypothesis, the patchy way of thinking is okay, and since hypotheses can be patched, we'll propose a different hypothesis to patch all these flaws, which is what Dr. Huntley proposed. The Moon is an artificial satellite of the Earth made by unknown intelligence. This may sound unbelievable, but let's not forget, it's fine to say this as a hypothesis. It can fill all the holes in the natural formation hypothesis of the Moon, and it can do so without any inconsistency. It satisfies NASA's requirements for theory of the origin of the Moon. Let's look at each of them. First, the low density of the Moon shows that it doesn't have a metallic core like the Earth because it's empty. NASA's moonquake experiment at the time also found the Moon made a sound like a bell. Of course, mainstream scientists explain that maybe there's some kind of crust so the vibration can't travel inside, and the rocks on the Moon's surface have almost no unstable substance, indicating that the lunar surface is more baked than the Earth. Maybe it's something special on the surface of the artificial satellite, just like scientists explain why the shockwave from the moonquake experiment only propagated at shallow depths, saying that there may be a hard shell. And the last one, Earth and Moon oxygen isotope ratios are similar, suggesting that the Earth and the Moon were formed when the distance between the two and the Sun should be about the same. This is easy to explain, because it was made on Earth. Maybe different parts were made and finally put together in space. The man-made hypothesis can naturally explain all the phenomena about the Moon, but some people would say, even if it fills the holes in the mainstream hypothesis, and there are also data to support it, but doesn't this kind of reasoning lead to an even bigger loophole of alien? Don't worry, we'll close this big loophole next. 2012 is a scientific fiction movie based on the end of the Mayan calendar, which ends on December 21st, 2012. The movie describes a geological catastrophe experienced by the Earth. Only a few people survived in the artificial ark. They were the best scientists and technicians of their time. Let's call them the 2012 survivors. If this movie were to have a sequel, the story I can think of would be something like this. The Earth has experienced a huge geological catastrophe. Those who survived found that the surface is no longer suitable for humans to live. Even breathing is difficult. When 2012 survivors come out of the ark, they have to wear oxygen masks similar to an astronaut suit. But the Earth in people's hearts is still the same beautiful home it was not so long ago. While everyone is migrating to the outer planet, people never give up observing the Earth. They want to know when this disaster will end. After a considerable amount of time, the descendants of the 2012 survivors living on the outer planets seems to be used to alien life, or maybe the planet they live on now is their home planet. The Earth is just a star that the ancestors attached special importance to for some reason. One day, the monitoring device found that, on Earth, microorganisms are starting to appear. With the emergence of microorganisms, after a considerable amount of time again, various creatures began to appear on the Earth. One type of the creatures were covered with hair, wearing leaves, eating raw meat, and have a basic social organization. What's even more amazing is that this group of creatures could breathe and survive on Earth without the aid of spacesuit. So the descendants of the 2012 survivors who have made their home on alien planets reopened the dusty ancestral documents, knowing that the Earth is actually their mother planet. So the 2012 descendants started a plan to return home. On Earth, someday, creatures wearing bark and eating raw meat, cheering for the beast they just caught. Suddenly a round object with a flashing light fell from the sky, the creatures looking at something they've never seen before, with fears in their eyes. At that moment, several people in spacesuits came out of the round object. Their spacesuits are shining brightly. In the eyes of primitive creatures, these lights are as blinding as the sun in the sky. People in spacesuits used their technology, played a few tricks in front of the primitive creators, easily turned themselves into a supreme being who can call the wind and rain, in the eyes of the primitive creators. With the worship of these primitive creatures, the next thing is easy. 2012 descendants exploit the ignorance of primitive creators, and the concept was introduced: sacrifice. Let the primitive creatures sacrifice their kind for shelter and help, and the 2012 descendants began researching new creatures on Earth, wishing to have the same body mechanism, to be able to breathe and survive on Earth at will. Some more time has passed. 2012 descendants, hiding in their spacesuits, found that this group of creatures on Earth somehow started to have language, and seems they also learned to write, gradually began to have a mind of their own, having their own god. They can't keep fooling around, so the 2012 descendants went back into the craft and left Earth, continue to monitor what's happening on Earth from afar. By this point, you may have understood the meaning of the story is, for the current human civilization on Earth, the aliens in their eyes is the last group of surviving human of the previous civilization. They had the highest level of technology at that time, so the new civilization has already lost at the beginning. Another point to emphasize, this is only the origin of some of the aliens, because after all, there are so many planets. Is there any intelligence up there? What we did here is merely connecting the end of the movie 2012 and the history of human evolution. In fact, from the historical relics found in various places, before the current human civilization, there did exist a high degree of civilization. For example, the Sumerian king list found throughout Mesopotamia lists the successive rulers and the time of their reign. The first king ruled for 28,800 years. And in the Indian epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana, prehistoric nuclear warfare was mentioned. It was stated that a puff of white smoke rises from the ground. The light is like 10,000 suns. Body burned beyond recognition, hair and nails all falling out. Food was poisoned. Soldiers have jumped into the stream, washing themselves and their equipment. The more you look at this, the more it looks like a prehistoric nuclear war. About prehistoric civilization, many materials can be found online. There are many people who have made videos to explain it, so we won't go into it again. Here we only talk about a simple logic. If there was a period of overlap between the old and new civilization, is there any record? The Chinese script or characters may show some evidence. It is well known that the Chinese is a hieroglyphic script. Characters evolve from physical objects, for example, the sun and the moon. It can be said, to some extent, characters reflect the world in the eyes of people at the time of their creation. This is a very important clue. Let's look at this word. It means emperor. Let's take the word apart and look at it. The symbol below means the king. Regarding the king, the three lines stands for heaven, earth, and man. The one who connects them is the king. Above the king there is the symbol which means white. It is the shining crown on top of the king's head. Some versions have a slightly different symbol on top, meaning great and start. It's usually interpreted as the first emperor, or the king at the beginning. Let's look again at the version with white on top. On top of the king's head, the shining crown represents the highest power that emits a dazzling white light. Let's open our mind, since it's a hieroglyphic script. So why must we interpret this according to the meaning of the word? Why can't it be just a symbol? If white on top doesn't mean shining bright, as a symbol, what would it be? Let's look at this version of emperor. There are 3 vertical lines on top of the head. Something like an eye is below the 3 lines. Even the other version, the symbol above the king, has a line on top. Below the line, that symbol means the eye. So let's look at the human eye. This photo is nothing special, but when put together with the next photo, a hypothesis has come to light. The emperor in the eyes of the ancients, it is the one hiding in a spacesuit, those who survived the end of the previous human civilization. For example, the 2012 survivors. They found advanced creatures on Earth, with language, writing skill, and social structure. A whole new civilization has been formed, so they left the Earth, silently observing what's happening on Earth, with only the legend of gods circulate in different races. New civilizations flourishes on Earth. Different races, tribes, all found suitable places to live and to grow their civilization. But as civilization developed, people become greedy. Maybe it's because of faith or limitation of resources. The conflict between races is getting worse, and so began the war. Even nuclear weapons were used. Following this is a catastrophe that destroyed the world, the Great Flood. Legends of the Great Flood are found all over the world, including the Book of Genesis, Quran of Islam, Epics of Babylon, and in the Buddhist scripture, the Sutra of the Buddha saying on extinction, all refer to the Great Flood. On Wikipedia, there are 47 pages of records of different legends of the Great Flood. On the cause of the Great Flood, there's a theory that a star passed by the Earth, or that some star hit the moon, bringing the moon very close to Earth for a period of time. Gravity sucked up the ocean water and caused tsunami. Tsunami repeatedly washed over land. There are many evidences to support this. For example, dinosaur fossils found everywhere. When they died, they all showed a death pose. Scientists have studied a possible cause, showing that the dinosaurs were soaked in water after death. We're not listing all the possible causes here. According to what we said at the beginning, if the moon is a flying machine made by prehistoric civilization, instead of the moon being pushed to Earth by external force, why can't it be the moon actively approaching the Earth, creating such a catastrophe, the so-called divine punishment, to the current civilization? We look at the documents of the Great Flood. Many of them foresaw the flood in advance. For example, Noah was told to build the ark, keep 2 of each creatures. It's not like a sudden unpredicted natural disaster. If the Great Flood was created by prehistoric civilization using the moon, what is the purpose? To discuss this, we have to see what the world was like after the flood. According to Huainanzi Tianwenxun, which is the astrology history record, in the past, there were 2 great lords competed to become the emperor. They were fighting angrily and broke a mountain called Buzhou. Then the pillars of heaven are broken and the earth lost its structure. The sky was tilted to the northwest, so the sun, moon, and stars are moving. The earth is fallen into the southeast, so the water and dust filled to the place. Simply put, after the Great Flood, when people saw the sky in the night, they found that the whole starry sky was moving to the northwest more than before. Relatively speaking, the ground then sinks to the southeast. In the language of science, the flood that covered most mountains and the tsunami that lasted for dozens of days caused the Earth's movement to be unstable. After gradually stabilizing, the ecliptic obliquity of the Earth's axis has changed, causing the sky to move to northwest and the Earth falls to the southeast. Consequences of tilt axis change perhaps wasn't immediately apparent. The rulers at that time only sent people to observe the stars in order to reformulate their calendar. However, the change of ecliptic obliquity has abysmal implications for life on Earth. Those who are interested in prehistory civilizations should know that the area around 30 degrees north latitude is a mysterious area with various ancient civilizations. When civilizations established in that area during that time, perhaps it was the favorable climate and the abundance of natural resources here. But as we look today, what was once a civilization, now there are deserts, oceans, barren of people. It is no longer a livable place. Thousands of years may be a long time for human, but in history it's just a short moment. Why does crop field become the sea? Ancient roads with abundant water turned into deserts. If we reverse the observation that sky tilting northwest and earth sinking southeast, it's not difficult to calculate. The previous obliquity of the ecliptic should be greater than the current 23 degrees. Accordingly, the tropics would have been larger than the current range. The temperate zone would expand in north and south directions respectively. So the global climate was warmer than it was afterwards. This explains the ancient civilizations around the 30 degrees north latitude, why they were once thrived but suddenly withered, and the climate is getting worse. If the strategy of destroy and terminate was done intentionally by prehistoric civilization using the moon, we can speculate on the motivation from the results. It's not difficult to derive two possibilities. One is relatively malicious. Prehistoric civilizations did not want the new civilizations to develop close to or even beyond them. Another one is relatively a goodwill, is that the prehistoric civilization found newer civilizations are repeating the same path they once took. This path develops on material level, but people gradually ignored the spiritual space and become materialistic. People are no longer friendly with each other. There are conflicts and wars of all kinds. Even in peaceful time, people's activities caused serious damage to the natural environment. To stop mankind from destroying themselves, previous civilizations used force to intervene. Like in the movie I, Robot, robots suddenly start restricting human activities. It was thought to be a problem with the robot, but it turned out that the robot had calculated that humans will eventually destroy themselves if they continue to develop like this. For the purpose of stopping mankind from destroying themselves, they chose to stop human activity. Back to the topic of the video, we explore the unsolved mystery of life, universe, and more. There might be many clues that have long been presented. We just haven't connected them together. Or for some reason, we don't dare to think about it, we don't dare to touch it. If we can think outside the box and take a fresh look at the planet we live on and the universe, perhaps a new understanding of the universe and life will emerge. If we can sort out a main line, many of the side issues may then have a natural explanation. For example, the Mayan calendar was once thought by some to be the end of the world. In fact, it is possible that it's based on the astronomy before the Great Flood, that is, the astronomy before the sky tilted to the northwest and the earth fell to the southeast. Why didn't they use the calendar that the Emperor Yao reformulated? There's another story. According to Zhuozhuan, which is the history documents of between 722 to 454 BC, there used to be 4 perils in mainland. They are the 4 fierce gods exiled to the 4 directions for Emperor Shun. The concept of the 4 perils is borrowed by many novels and video games, so that many people nowadays think that the 4 perils are 4 beasts. In the records of the 5 emperors, it states that the 4 perils are the sons of the 4 tribe leaders. If we remove the exaggeration in literature works, the nature of the 4 perils is perhaps the 4 tribe leaders of the time. They disobeyed Emperor Shun's rule, and so were exiled. The 4 perils may be the totems of each of these 4 tribes. Could it be that the Mayan civilization was one of the 4 perils? After being exiled, they still used the calendar based on the astronomy before the sky tilted to the northwest and the earth fell to the southeast. About this guess, I found a clue in Popol Vuh, which is called the Mayan Bible. It is the text that describes the early Mayan dynasties. It says that the ancestors of the Mayans came from the place where the sun rises in the east. So it seems, on Earth at that time, there existed a central dynasty, similar to the current United Nations, below which there are various tribes. One thing worth noting is that there was a high level of technology at that time. The Classic of Mountains and Sea is a geographic book written around that time, but let's for now ignore the geographic description in the book. Just look at the way it describes geography. It often goes in a certain direction. First there are mountains, then there is something else, and continue for how many miles and something else is there. From the description, it seems that people at that time could go different directions or in straight lines, with no mention of getting over the mountain, walking around the river, or trekking around the trail. It's rather like today's aerial photography. Recall the prehistoric civilization we talked about earlier, or just think about the 2012 survivors who had the most advanced technology of the time. This could answer many history questions, such like why did something appear in one location back then, which should only existed thousands of miles away. One last question. What do aliens look like? The exact answer to this question should be we don't know, because no one has seen it. The alien corpse or something related that used to circulate on the internet are also unverifiable. So where do we start with this question? To explain the biological characteristic, inevitably, evolution has to be mentioned. The history of evolution is controversial, but let's put it aside for now, and just talk about a simple logic. If evolution theory could explain the origin of our human civilization, then as the last surviving human of the previous or pre-previous human civilizations, who were also produced on this earth, once also lived on this earth, evolution theory might also work for them. In Darwin's Origin of Species, that all plants and animals evolved from earlier, more primitive forms, step by step to today's form. Why does this thing look like this, and that thing looks like that? They all have their own historical origins. This history, or the most primitive state, how far back do we have to go? Stephen Hawking's Big Bang theory describes that the universe came from an infinitely heavy and small point, followed by the Big Bang. But there's a big gap between the Big Bang and biological features of creators. Let's shorten the process by looking at similar description of the origin of the world described by Taoism. It says in the Tao Te Ching, all things under heaven are born from existence, and existence is born from inexistence. So everything begins from nothing. Nothing creates something. The two forms yin and yang. Step by step they are all things in heaven and earth. Although it's hard to comprehend, this sounds a bit similar to the Big Bang theory. One of the most important links between primitive and the abundance is yin and yang. This is probably not new to you. If it is unfamiliar, it can be interpreted as a highly abstract description or classification of the objective world. The word in English is duality. It means complement, pairing. Why it matters? Because in our objective world, many things have this property. For example, day and night, far and near, hot and cold, dry and humid, big and small, good and bad. The things or concepts that have two relative extremes all have duality. Yin and yang also complement and transform. For example, day and night will go round and round. A mountain has a yang side and a yin side. Depending on the position of the sun, yang side may become yin side. Yin side then becomes yang side again. All these follow a generic principle. Yang tends to be more active, warm, moving. Yin tends to be less active, cold, passive, static. If all things begin with nothing, with yin and yang as the most primitive state, what does it say in the human biological feature? According to the traditional categorization of yin and yang for numbers, even numbers are yin and odd numbers are yang. We look at human body, there are 7 apertures on the head. From top to bottom, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils. 3 even numbers corresponding to 3 yin. Further down, a mouth, a navel, and an anus. 3 odd numbers corresponding to 3 yang. If we follow the yin-yang trigram, 3 yin are called kun, 3 yang are called qian. The upper kun and the lower qian form a tie, which means peaceful, safe, and good. Why is it good? We can see in the nature, yin descends, yang ascends. The water in the sky will condense and fall when it gets cold. Water falling to the ground, when it gets hot, it will vaporize and float again. Kun on top, qian on bottom, or yin above yang. It forms a scene with active communication between heaven and earth, so there is life. And if we turn the top and bottom upside down, 3 yang on top, 3 yin on the bottom, yang or warmness will not go down, yin or coldness will not rise up. No communication between heaven and earth, thus no life in anything, then it becomes a P diagram, meaning bad, lifeless. What is this state? In this state, the person would have been turned upside down. And when is the person in this state? Isn't it when the baby is in mother's womb? When the baby is born, yin and yang turns upside down with yin on top and yang below. There is communication between heaven and earth, thus a new life is born. What does it mean to say this? In the Taoist explanation of the origin of the world, we found a theory that's close to the Big Bang theory. If prehistoric humans also arose on Earth, and were also the only advanced life at that time, to some extent, they should look roughly like the human today. Well, that's the end of the video for today. What I said in the video is purely personal. If you think it's ridiculous, then just think of it as a story you heard over dinner. If you think it's interesting, please subscribe to my channel. Finally, we end today's video with a quote from the movie 2012. Just like this glass of water, your mind is full of preconceptions and opinions. If you want to see the light of wisdom, you must first empty your cup. Okay, we'll see you next time.